big question for your consideration. Is it possible that hidden within the stories that we love lies a pathway to the life that we've always yearned for? Now, in this video, I'm going to prove that is a truth. It altered my life and over 4,000 people that I've had the honor of working with. So why do we love the stories that we love? Have you ever wondered that? Why do certain stories, they just stay with us for the rest of our lives, while hundreds of others are forgotten before we even leave the theater or close the book on the last page? It's because we identify with the hero's character and willingness to take a different pathway to victory. Not a metaphor, not wishful thinking, but an actual pathway, a map, if you will. Think about your favorite stories. Let's take 4 big ones: Star Wars, Rocky, The Matrix, and let's say The Wizard of Oz. Almost every culture has told some version of the same story for thousands of years. Different characters, settings, continents, and countries, generations, yet somehow they're all the same story and they all move us exactly the same way. Now, years ago, mythology scholar Joseph Campbell dedicated his life to understanding why the same basic stories have lasted for over 8,000 years. After studying thousands of stories from cultures all over the world, continents, everywhere, he made an astonishing discovery. They weren't different stories at all. They were all telling one story, and he called it the hero's journey. Look, I've always loved that idea, but over the years, I actually found myself thinking about it a little bit differently, because I don't believe it's just the story of a hero. It's really the story of becoming. The story of becoming who you and I knew we were always capable of becoming. Think about Luke Skywalker. Before he became a Jedi, he was an ordinary young man living an ordinary life. Rocky wasn't a champion. Neo didn't believe he was the one. And poor little Dorothy, man, she just wanted to go home. Now, this is key. Every one of them began with uncertainty, doubt, and of course, fear. Okay? They questioned themselves when they were heralded, in other words, called for something bigger, and they resisted the call. As a matter of fact, Campbell pointed out that refusing the call is always part of the hero's journey. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we love these stories so much. Not because we see ourselves as the hero at the end, but because we recognize ourselves in the hero at the very beginning. Look, we've all felt there was something more inside us. We've all wondered if we were capable of more. We've all felt that tension between the life we're living and the life that somehow we sense is possible. That's the calling that you feel, right? The question stayed with me for years. Why does this pattern appear everywhere? Why does it resonate so deeply with people from every culture, every generation, every walk of life, every continent? The more I thought about it, the more convicted I became that these stories weren't simply for entertaining us. They were trying to remind us of something. Now, that question led me somewhere that, man, I just never expected. Not deeper into mythology, but actually into science. And what I discovered there changed the way that I understood creativity, purpose, and actually potential, and ultimately my own life. That question stayed with me. Actually, it stuck on me. Why did these stories feel so true? Why did they resonate so deeply with so many people? The answer didn't come from mythology. Like I said, it came from science, and actually a very unexpected place, NASA. Back in the late 60s, NASA commissioned Dr. George Land to study creativity. They wanted him to find creative geniuses to grow the NASA program. So Land designed a test to measure creative thinking, yet he rarely found those that would be classified as genius. For some reason, he decided to give it to 1,600 children ages 4 to 5, and the results, mind-blowing. 98% scored as creative genius. 98% of 5-year-olds. Then he followed those same children at age 10 and 15. That number started to fall right off dramatically, and by adulthood, only 2% still tested at the same level. Think about that for a moment. And here's the good news. We didn't lose our creative genius. Something happened to it. Now, Land was clear. Now, stay with me here because I'm going to come, full circle as to why we love the stories that we love. I'll give you a clue. Hope. Okay, think about that. Anyway, Land was clear that the creative genius within me, within you, all of us, it's not broken, missing, or taken away. It had been, I love this word, sequestered. The single realization of that changed everything for me. That word, it stayed with me. Sequestered, great word. Simply buried beneath years of conditioning. Suddenly, I stopped asking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get things done? And started asking, what happened to me? What happened to my creative genius? Now, I'll share that in a few moments, but we love the stories we love, like I shared a few minutes ago, because the hero, Luke, Rocky, they take that initial step to free the best version of themselves. See, that feeling that you've had about being capable of more, of doing more, it's the genius within you calling you. Can you imagine turning a creative genius loose on your big dream? That hope that you've always had that you could be capable of more, imagine turning a genius loose on that. It is true. There's a creative genius in you. So how did that creative genius get sequestered? Now, brilliant behavioral psychologists B.F. Skinner and Land were on exactly the same page. Skinner showed that much of human behavior isn't consciously chosen. We got conditioned in school to what? Follow instead of think, to comply instead of developing our individuality and gifts, and worst of all, compete instead of create and collaborate. Comparison steals our joy, and it fosters approval seeking, and that conditioning sequestered your creative genius too. That idea sent me on a journey of my own. I immersed myself in the writings of Charles Hennell, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Wallace Wattles, Napoleon Hill, and many other great thinkers over the centuries like Socrates, Plato, and a little carpenter from the Middle East who said, you'll do greater things than I. They all are always pointing to the same truth. The world we experience on the outside is actually a printout of the world that's been created within. The more I studied, the more everything began fitting together. Campbell had mapped the journey, Land had showed us the treasure that the hero's looking for, and Skinner explained, or helped explain anyway, how it became hidden. That's when I realized something that completely changed my perspective. Maybe the hero's journey in all those movies and stories isn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it's about removing everything that convinced you and I that we weren't who we already were. Creative geniuses. That became my journey. If any part of this feels familiar, I'd like to invite you to let it become your journey too. If what we've talked about so far resonates with you, you might be wondering, it makes sense, but where do I begin? That's exactly the question every real hero eventually asks. And if you think about the stories we've been talking about, Star Wars, The Matrix, the answer is always the same. A guide appears. Not someone who's going to live the hero's life for them, but someone who simply sees what the hero can't yet see in themselves. Yoda and Obi-Wan saw something in Luke before Luke saw it. Mickey saw it in Rocky. Morpheus saw it in Neo. Look, and I'm not comparing myself to those guides, but I do understand the role that they played, and I'd be honored to play that same role in your discovery, your journey, finding your remarkable potential. Every one of those heroes had something in common before the real adventure began. They made a decision. They finally answered the call to be their best. And the moment they did, the mentor could finally begin preparing for each step that comes next. Look, if you made it this far, if something inside you has been quietly saying for years, I know I could do better, I know there's more in me than I've been living, then maybe this is your moment. Maybe this is the beginning of your own story. The story of what? The story of becoming. That's the real point of the hero's journey. That's why the very first thing we'll do is spend 5 consecutive days together. Just me and you, one-on-one live on Zoom. Not because I'm going to give you all the answers. I'm not. My role is a lot simpler than that. It's to help you uncover what George Land believed never disappeared. Your creative genius. Every hero begins training before the adventure really begins. Now, Standing Tall is where yours begins. Look, I'm grateful that it became a bestseller in 3 different languages, but it's not a book, okay? It's actually a workbook. Think of it as your first few days of preparation. Every chapter introduces you to one of the 7 ancient verities. These aren't ideas to admire, but principles to practice. Because knowledge doesn't apply itself, people apply the knowledge. The habits you build before the journey are the habits that you're going to rely on during the journey. That's why we start with repetition of the verities, kind of like Rocky hitting the meat and Luke with the lightsaber. Before we spend those 5 days together, I also want to understand you, not in general, but you. That's why you're going to take a short color code quiz, and from your answers, I'm going to create a personalized 27-page color code profile. It helps me understand what naturally drives you, your core motive, how you're wired, where your greatest strengths are already, and where you might be unintentionally getting in your own way. Then you'll take our exclusive What's Holding You Back profile. George Land helped us understand that our creative genius becomes sequestered through conditioning. This profile helps us discover how that conditioning has uniquely affected your life. Maybe it's perfectionism, people-pleasing. Maybe you've learned to play life so safe that you've stopped trusting your imagination or your intuition or both. Whatever the pattern, once we see it, we can begin to change it. Now think about what's actually happening. By the time we begin those 5 consecutive days together, I'm not trying to figure you out. I already understand what naturally motivates you, your core motive. I understand how the conditioning has been affecting you and quietly standing in your way. Now together we'll build a plan, actually a map designed specifically for you. Not some generic thing for the average person, but for you. 5 consecutive days with me, okay? Not because 5 days changes a life. My ego isn't that big, but because 5 days can change a direction. And sometimes that's all we need, a new direction. 5 days, we're going to work together. We'll make adjustments. We'll celebrate victories. And sometimes the breakthrough will be big. But more often than not, they'll be surprisingly small. A new thought, a different response. One promise that you finally keep to yourself. Now, those little victories matter because confidence, listen to me now, doesn't arrive all at once. It grows, one promise at a time. Then something remarkable begins to happen. You stop admiring courage and you start practicing it. You stop wondering what your purpose in life may be because you start discovering it once you find the real you. And that creative genius that once felt buried begins finding its way back into your life every day. It's incredible. When those 5 days are over, our work isn't. Because no hero was ever meant to finish a journey alone. Napoleon Hill called it the Mastermind Alliance. I simply call it continuing the journey together. Twice every month, we meet live with others taking their hero's journey, not for a lecture, okay, but for conversations, questions, what's working, encouragement, accountability. Actually, a community of people committed to becoming the person that they know they're capable of becoming, just like you. So let's go back to the beginning, okay? When I asked you a question, let's go all the way back there. Why do we love the stories that we love? And I suggested that hidden within the reason that we love those stories lies the pathway to the life we've always yearned for. And I told you I'd prove it, and I have. After years of searching, I believe that's true because every one of those stories has been pointing to the same place. Not somewhere out there, but right in here. The hero that you've admired your whole life was never meant to remain on that movie screen or in the pages of a book. Those stories weren't written so you could spend your life admiring somebody else's courage. They were written to remind you of your own. You know, Land showed us your creative genius isn't destroyed, it was sequestered. And Campbell showed us that every hero receives a call. Now the only question that remains is, will you answer your call? Peace be the journey.